Conflicts of interest that aren't on the interest register? Yes, Councillor McInnes.
When we get to the bylaw on control of animals, got a conflict of interest on beekeeping.
Right, so you'll step away from the table at that point. Okay. Thank you. And Councillor Hassan?
Beekeeping bylaw and the district licensing.
And so are you going to step away from the table at the beekeeping for both of those? Okay, thank you. And Councillor Alexander.
I just wondered, did we formally adopt the apologies? I know we
no, not yet. That's. Oh no, I've skipped over it. Yeah, well done. No conflicts, Mark. Apology from Malcolm Lyle. Thank you, Mark. Second Adipaha. All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Public forum today, there is none. We had planned on having a couple of public forum today, but just due to time constraints, we've asked them to come to the next meeting, so we will expect them to be here next time. We've got confirmation of minutes on page 11 through 20 of the ordinary meeting of the council on the 26th of August. Someone happy to move and second those? Jenny, thank you. Seconded Sophie. Any discussion on those minutes? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. Minutes of the audit and risk meeting from the 2nd of September. Moved to Councillor Lemon. Seconded Reid. Any discussion on those minutes? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And meetings of the inaugural representation review subcommittee held on the 19th of August. A mover and a seconder. Moved Councillor Alexander. Seconded Bob.
Just note that they are draft and there has already been a correction sent in for them.
Thank you. Any further discussion on those minutes? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. We've got 4 items currently requiring attention: Glen Tunnel drainage, Arthur's Pass stormwater, assumptions and uncertainties for the long-term plan in the sections at Mill Pond Lane. Item number 1, pages 33 and 34, is a report from me. A couple of things that have happened since, which I'll just update you on. Last week we had the Canterbury Mural Forum, and at that meeting a number of things were discussed, including how we progress with the water discussion for Canterbury, and how we ensure that we put our best foot forward so that each council has the right data to make their own decision as to whether they engage at phase 2. There had been a lot of discussion with the top of the South Island that includes Nelson, Tasman, Marlborough, ourselves and the West Coast, Canterbury and the West Coast, around working together. And in the end, it's been decided that each region will do some of their own work. Otago Southland have already started where some of that work is, but we want to make sure that the data is all aligned so that there's a consistency in what's presented to each region, so that when discussions, if discussions need to be had about areas greater than just a single region, it's easy to understand what the outcomes from that is going to be. And yesterday there was a meeting of the working party for Three Waters, and he determined to head out to engage a contractor to undertake that work, that there'd be a project manager that would sit in at ECAN. The project manager's role is around relationships, ensuring that the work is done and that it fits with the interregional stuff, and also with iwi. The project itself has some quite tightly defined outcomes that we're wanting to see. On the steering group, or the working group, there is a number of mayors, including myself, and I was elected chair of that yesterday. And we also have 3 places for 3 iwi representatives, and Te Maire Tau is the first one of those to sit there, and there's space for another 2 Ngāi Tahu appointees to that group as well. And there is Ngāi Tahu staff working alongside council staff at the staff level to make sure that the information is correct and is up to date as it can be. We also had Eugenie Sage come and present to the Mural Forum, Minister of Conservation, and she's a couple of other ministers as well, just expanded on some of the work that she had been up to, and really wanted to engage with us and the Mural Forum around, if she is re-elected, making sure that she's a local MP, making sure that some of the things that are on her work program are aligned with Canterbury's plans. And we launched the Mayor's Plan for Canterbury, and she was there for some of that discussion document I've got here with me today, and she was quite keen to make sure the Wellington local government connections were made the best they could be. We farewelled David Brommel. David has led the secretariat that supports the mayoral forum for a number of years since Dame Margaret Baisley had been involved, and has been a key part of mayors working together and actually delivering a lot of behind the scenes work that we rely on to happen. And finally, the Mayor's Plan for Canterbury was launched. We talked about this a few months ago now. 5 particular work streams. We've narrowed the focus from the CREDS program that there had been beforehand. Now we're looking at sustainable environmental management, shared economic prosperity, better freight transport options, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and our 3 water services. And at the moment, the 3 water services is front and centre for us all. So yeah, that's probably the only update that I've got post the stuff that's in the papers, and happy to answer any questions if there are any on that. Councillor Alexander.
Just one omission on your list. As noted in the earlier minutes, you did actually attend the inaugural meeting of the Representation Review Committee on the 19th.
Oh yes, thanks Mark. We can add that and update it for the final copy. Thank you. There being no further questions, I'll move that you received my report, and seconder, Councillor Ipaha. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Next we have Malcolm Johnson join us. Malcolm, if you'd like to take a seat at the front of the room. It's on pages 35 through 40, noting Councillor Hassan step back from the table for this presentation. The recommendation is that we receive the report. A mover and a seconder on that, Alexander and Mugford. And Malcolm, I'll hand to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'll just take my report as read, and I'm happy to answer any questions at all.
Are there any questions of the report? Great. Thank you for the report that you've presented. Good information for us to be able to understand without the questions. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Item 3, thank you, Malcolm. Chief Executive's report. This is on pages 41 through 49. There's a couple of recommendations. Firstly, that the electoral system for 2022 and 2025 is received for information, and the council resolves to confirm the continued use of first past the post for the 2022 and 2025 elections. Move to Councillor Alexander.
Councillor Gallagher.
Gallagher, second. David, is there anything you'd like to say?
Nothing to add. Happy to answer questions though, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Noting that I'm a member of this committee, it was an apology to that meeting. Some of which I might say may be covered at that meeting, but it seems the wrong way around the process we do this, in that we do the representation review, but we decide the voting mechanism first, because the outcome of our representation review might recommend a different voting system. I just want to put on the record that the Local Electoral Act does allow us to actually demand a poll, but it's more labour intensive, more money from our ratepayers to do that. But it appears that if we do decide that another mechanism may be better, that's the only option available to us, but that has to be done within the next year. So the time frame is relatively tight, even with allowing for that. So I guess I'm just sort of putting my hand up and saying, somehow or other, we should be representing back to the powers that be. This is the wrong way around. It should allow us to do the representation review, and the voting system falls out of that.
Thanks, Grant. I think there does need to be feedback, and that was some of the discussion that was at the meeting. And Councillor Alexander, you might like to comment on that?
Yeah, that's exactly we had the very same discussion, Councillor Miller, at the first meeting, that the law has it the wrong way around. And you're exactly right. If we decided on a different system that was better suited, say, to STV, well, it's too late to make that decision. And that perhaps when the Mayor has discussions with government ministers at some point, and particularly the Minister of Internal Affairs, we might feedback that the law has got it the wrong way around, and that it would be a much better system if you decide on the ward structure, the number of councillors, and then decide on the best voting system rather than decide on the voting system before you decide on the others.
Councillor McInnes.
Just a quick question, which may be too early, but possibly more for Councillor Alexander. Is it worth running a poll, or the committee considering a poll as part of the next local body elections, like at the same time, seeing as stuff's being mailed out at the same time?
If I can answer that, that would be a national decision, and I think that that's probably reflected in the comments that Councillor Miller has made as well, which we will feed back in our debrief to Electoral Commission.
So maybe a follow-up from here, and it's going to be noted that we'll draft the letter and engage in that process out of my office. Thank you. Any further questions there? All those in favour of receive the report say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And then we move those recommendations. Sorry, I should have said that too. Item number 4 is pages 50 through 59. It's Rolleston Reserve Development Consultative Procedure, that we adopt the draft statement of proposal for the Rolleston Reserve Design Consultation for the purposes of undertaking the special consultative process. Mover, Councillor Bland. Seconder, Councillor Reid. Any discussion on that item, Councillor Alexander?
Should this recommendation also include the appointment of councillors to the hearing panel? The report goes on to recommend that there is a hearing panel appointed, but doesn't actually talk about who appointing the panel. And in a similar way, since our last meeting where we discussed the Rolleston Town Centre consultation, staff have recommended there should be a hearing panel on for that as well. So I'm just wondering when we're going to appoint councillors to these hearing panels. And my suggestion, and I'm not volunteering at this stage, would that we have a mix of ward councillors and councillors from outside the ward to hear both of these consultations. And in fact, it could well be the same panel, given the very nature that they are co-linked projects, that it could be the same panel hear both submissions on both sets of consultation.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Miller?
Can the property manager please give me an assurance that this is genuinely needed? I think we've consulted this to death. I think our community has heard about this development for so many years now, had that many opportunities to consult and give feedback to us. Do we really need to go back again and have another crack at them? It just seems that we're overkilling the consultation here.
Douglas?
So the reserve, on the reserve, the report in front of you, yeah, we do need to do this. We haven't done this as yet. This is new consultation. So it is, we've been clearly doing engagement work for a while now, informing the consultation process. With regards to the town centre, the issue is sort of around the specific issue, which is the Slow Road or Wordsworth Street. And that's where we just need to go back and just do this final bit of consultation, which is why we've just changed the approach to the hearing panel for that. As there's only that one specific issue that we are seeking, we've got to make sure we consult on, although other feedback is welcome. In reality, you're quite right. We've done a significant amount of work on this through a number of processes over probably the last 5 or 6 years. So in terms of the hearing panel, we will expect that to occur in November. So, if you want to appoint a hearing panel today, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll bring a report back with some names for hearing panels, which could still be the same people on both panels. So either way, probably more easier if we just bring you back a report once we've got interest from councillors who wish to be on that panel, or you may wish the full council to be the panel.
Councillor Reid?
Just further to what Douglas has said about this consultation, it was actually the original Rolleston Town Centre Master Plan had with the reserve area that there was still consultation to be done on that because there wasn't anything concrete put down for that. So that is following on from this. So this is, as Douglas has said, this is a new consultation on this area, and it is something that we need to do because it is still left open from that long ago when council adopted it in April 2014.
Thank you. Councillor Epa?
Oh, kia ora. Just on the point of consultation, just wanted to say what a great job Douglas and his team have done in consulting with the Runanga, Te Tau Mutu. I think it's a fantastic collaboration of ideas and origin, and it's lovely to see it woven into the heart of the development. So thank you.
Cool. I'd rather we did appoint people today, and if we don't need them because there's no submissions, then we don't need them, rather than bringing another report back to this meeting. I don't think they necessarily need to be the same people. We can make that decision as each panel is appointed, but if there's 3 or 4 people that wanted to register their interest in being part of this panel today, we could appoint them, and then that's taken care of. Are there 4 people that would like to do this? Councillor Reid, Councillor McInnes, Councillor Ipaha, and Councillor Gallagher.
There we go.
That's 4.
Yeah.
Is there any further discussion on that membership and on this particular part of the process? Councillor Alexander.
I was also just going to add the requirement to have a consultation on the reserve master plan is actually an outcome of the whole reserve exchange process done some years ago, where the recommendation of the commissioners was that there be a further consultation on the design of the upgraded reserve. So it's actually an outcome of a prior process, this consultation as well. I appreciate Councillor Miller's consideration that we've consulted this to death, but this is actually, as has been said, a new consultation that has been required by a previous process.
Thank you. So now we've got 2 recommendations in front of us. Any further discussion on these? All those in favour? Oh, we need a mover and seconder. We've got that. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Item number 5 is the Selwyn District Council bylaw for keeping of animals, poultry and bees. And 2 councillors will be stepping away from the table for this discussion. Billy, welcome to the meeting. There's 5 recommendations in front of us. So to commence a special consultative procedure, to adopt a statement of proposal, that we make sure that it's public and on our website and our libraries and service centres, that the submission period be through till the 6th of November. And again, we're going to need to appoint some councillors to the panel. Grant, did you want to say something before?
I mean, I'm happy with the A, B, C, D and E, but I do ask that we adopt an amendment to perhaps B to exclude item 9, keeping of cats. Our staff have been very, very diligent in explaining the reasons why, although it may seem desirable to have this in the bylaw, practically speaking and pragmatically speaking, it's very, very difficult to enforce and bring to pass. I think Selwyn District has had a history of being very good at not using laws when education will do a better job. And I think this is an opportunity where we could use our skills with other organisations such as the SPCA and likewise to create a document where it's not a bylaw, but it's an education process where we get cats owners educated. And I think by and large, the cat owners of Selwyn are educated. They de-sex their cats, they microchip them because they love them. But having an enforcement regime which requires council to go around and check if you have 3 or 4 cats, or if your cat is at home at night, or hand out fines, is basically, for want of a better word, going to be unmanageable. And when central government has a policy in place with a regulated policy that enables us to do this with regulations and funding, I'm all for voting for it. But I think this is a time where we should step back and be a bit pragmatic, acknowledge we have a problem around feral cats, particularly in our Melbourne areas, and work with education and with SPCA to say if our great wildlife protectors do catch a feral cat, how do we recognise it as a feral cat and how do we dispose of it humanely so that it doesn't attack our wildlife? So if anyone's, I would move that we do amend B to exclude keeping of cats. If I have a seconder, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Lemon. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, look, obviously I'm supporting Councillor Miller in this and thinking of earlier discussions on this. It's my belief that rather than insert it in there as of right and then expect submissions to take it out or support it, that we rely on the people that are going to submit to come in and insert it if they need to and have that discussion. I don't think it should have been inserted in the first place. We had clear advice from staff, and there isn't a national policy on this that allows us to fall back on like the dog control laws. So I think it was, whilst the intent around the table was good and proper to control an issue, a perceived or real issue, it's a clumsy approach to it. So obviously I'll second Councillor Miller's amendment.
Thank you. This has been brought back to us in the way that it has on our direction. So this hasn't been something that staff have wanted to continue with, and as has already been said, there was quite clear direction from staff that enforceability and legality were 2 major issues with the piece of legislation. So I just want to thank you, Billy, for bringing back what we asked for. And now it's really the discussion to say, did we really want what we were asking for? And Councillor Alexander, and then Bland may have some other views.
Yeah, I support the mover and seconder. I mean, to date, we've had a good discussion about cats, microchipping them, not microwaving them. And as one of my colleagues suggested at some point, but this is a pragmatic decision not to proceed with the inclusion of the keeping of cats in this bylaw. It would be very difficult to enforce, very expensive to enforce, and as has been noted in the report, you ought not to be putting stuff into bylaws that you're not going to enforce. So if we're not likely to enforce it, it ought not to be there. There is one other part of the bylaw that I have an issue with that I was unable to convince staff was around the keeping of poultry and around the definition of poultry, because it's the definition of poultry is any domesticated bird. That definition will capture budgerigars. And if you read the bylaw, we'd be expecting this bylaw will expect budgerigars to be kept in chicken coops. It's absurd. I think that's another one that I hope submitters, some of whom may be listening, will submit on, that we need a slightly amended definition of poultry, perhaps with a weight limit or something that isn't quite as catch-all as the current definition in this bylaw, because I think that where that stands is taking it too far, but I haven't been able to get it changed. So perhaps there is somebody out there listening who will submit that we should have a slightly amended definition of poultry that doesn't catch small domesticated birds along with the big domesticated birds.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Bland.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, I support the previous speakers to a degree, although I do think we need a little bit of balance put into it. And I smiled to myself when I read this report, because it is slanted towards a person that really does not want to see a bylaw introduced that would have our staff so kind of on cat patrol, which, and I don't think any councillors would like that either. But I would like perhaps just to put a little bit of balance to this and say that, whereas it may say in the report that we don't have a problem with feral cats, and that may well be that we don't in an urban environment, but we certainly do in our native forest and the small amounts of forest that we have left. Feral cats, feral cats have been a problem in New Zealand since the middle 17th century. In the old days, when ships came to New Zealand, they often had rats on them, so they put cats on the ships to stop the rats. And of course, when they pulled up to our offshore islands, the cats and the rats hopped off and then fed on our native bird life. And of course, many years ago, there were no animals in New Zealand. There's certainly heaps of them now. It got to the extent where cats actually decimated the population of native wildlife and birds on our offshore islands to the point that we had none. And they had to be reintroduced after the cats had been exterminated. And I remember, and as councillors, some of us went, and you would remember going down to Rakiura or Stewart Island, and they had to actually remove the kakapo from Stewart Island because the cats had decimated the whole lot of them, so that they get rid of the cats and then put our native wildlife back on. So we do have a problem with feral cats. And I think when Mr. Ellis came and spoke to us, we may have kind of got our wires crossed a little bit. What he was saying is that we, as a council, have a lot of Department of Conservation land in our district, and the Department of Conservation itself is actually charged with eliminating or keeping under control pests. And the Department of Conservation in New Zealand recognise feral cats as pests, just like feral pigs, stoats, weasels, and so on. Now, when the settlers arrived in New Zealand, they released rabbits, and the rabbits were for foods. And when the rabbits got out of control, they then introduced ferrets and weasels to kill the rabbits, and then cats to kill the rabbits. So for 200 odd years, we have had feral cats, which are not the household cats that we're actually thinking about now when we talk about urban areas. The household cats and the odd stray is not the problem. It is these feral cats, and there is some sort of loose indication that there may be as many as 2 million feral cats in New Zealand. And remember that we have quite a little bit of a Department of Conservation land and so on. And I think what Mr. Ellis was saying, to make it easier for the authorities to actually control these feral cats, it would be good if we had some way of recognising what is actually a moggy in a house versus a feral cat. Now, a feral cat is not some mangy looking thing that is easily identified. They look just the same as a normal, healthy household cat. So there is a problem. What he was suggesting, it was only a suggestion that maybe people should or be encouraged to microchip or de-sex the cats. And it seems from the observation of our staff that over 90% of the cats are de-sexed and and microchipped anyway, so there's not really a problem. But what I do see is, as a council, we could lobby the organisations that are really responsible for cats. We could ask them to enforce in their wild the cats, the feral cats in their forests. And we could also, as a council, bring it to the attention of the people with urbanisation. As people move into our country, they bring with them cats and dogs, that they have a responsibility that goes far wider than just looking after the cat in their place of residence. So I do think that it's an educational approach that we should take, but I think that we need to be a little bit stronger than we have in the past. And the fact that this report says we don't have a cat problem or a perceived cat problem, we probably don't when it comes to cats in the urban environment. We certainly do in the Department of Conservation. And if you choose to have a look into it, even just Google cats, you'll see that we do have a serious feral cat problem in New Zealand, but not one in the urban area, because we don't seem to worry about it so much. But they're just my 2 bits. I do agree that it'd be ridiculous to have a cat patrol or a part of our organisation solely trying to sort out domestic cats. It wouldn't work. We do have rather a large gap there that we could educate and make the public alert to the problems that we have with feral cats.
Thank you. I mentioned that Minister Eugenie Sage was at the Mural Forum on Friday, and I talked with her about the fact that this was on our agenda today. She was quite interested to hear that it was, and I sort of preempted the type of discussion that we've had now because of the lack of leadership from central government around legislation to support the control of cats, which is the biggest hurdle that we've had and probably the basis for a lot of the discussion today. She is interested in further conversation around this and what Wellington might be able to do, and contingent on an election result and her being there. She did want to encourage us to get involved with the Minister of Conservation to raise this issue with them. And so I wonder whether the mover and seconder are okay with this. I mean, I can write this anyway, but if there's an action from today's discussion would be that I write to the Minister of Conservation around this, because it seems to be that it's a feral cat problem and we're trying to deal with it in a domestic cat way. And that's
Yeah, I'm happy to add to the motion that the Mayor be delegated to write to the central government to suggest that they look at control of feral cats. It seems to be a logical way to do it, rather than the top down, rather than the bottom up. Just while I've got the microphone, just to reassure you, Mark, your budget is not under threat. That poultry is defined as an animal which is raised for meat, feathers or eggs. So the budgetary would come under animals. Well, that's the definition of a poultry.
Billy, you've sat there patiently. How is what we've said going to change what you are going to do?
Well, if you work with what you've said, we would go back and readdress the bylaw to take out the sections of cats. And if you're happy with the fact that everything else remains the same, we could still proceed as according to the structure of going out of public consultation with the dates. However, the dates do clash with the district plan dates, and it may be prudent to move those dates later, which is another thing to discuss.
In some ways, I think that actually doing them together wouldn't be a bad thing, because it's all around the rules and laws regulating a district and how it functions and works. And there might be the opportunity for conversations at some of the community drop-in events that are happening to also discuss this too. I don't want to unnecessarily delay this piece of work. And also a lot of this has come out of the fact that we've done the district plan review, and these things that were in the district plan previously have now dropped out and have been dealt with by a bylaw. So to me, they're actually, it's almost one and the same piece of project, and this is just another stream of that. Tim, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on how they could work together.
No, I agree with you, Sam. It sounds good.
Okay. So Billy, if we can continue with what we've got here, and you'll just take out the cats part of it, and everything else will remain the same. We just need to appoint 3 councillors to the commissioners panel. It could be 3 or 4. Is anybody wanting to put their hand up to be on this panel? We've got Councillor Lemon, we have Mugford, Miller. Well, you haven't expressed a view against what was going out. You've expressed a view that's determined that cats will be excluded. So you can actually still, we can all still sit as a commissioner, because we're hearing at the far end of the decision. If you're happy to, Miller.
reached my level of success. Bees in animal libels.
Murray, Mugford and Miller, if we're okay with the 3 M's taking on that work. Is there anybody else that was really hoping to? Yeah. Okay. So it's moved by Miller and Lemon. All those in favour of that recommendation with those names inserted, say aye. Aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you everyone for that discussion. Thank you, Billy. Asset Manager, Water Services, Water Service Delivery, the monthly update, pages 83 through 93. That the recommendation is that the council receives the report. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Mugford and Bland. And welcome to the table. I'll hand to you, Murray.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. So our water service report starts on page 83. And we'll immediately turn over to page 84. So as normal, all the new items are coloured red, and you'll see there's a lot of red in this report, which is good. Lots of new things to talk about. The first item, section 3.1, is on Pines wastewater. And so this is a bit of blue sky thinking for you today. It's not saying it's what we're going to do. This is sort of an aspirational thing, which we'll be no doubt talking about a lot more in the future. But way of background, the Pines wastewater treatment plant has been designed to be constructed in modules to allow the plant to be upgraded to meet growth as demand occurs. The original Pines treatment plant, the ultimate capacity is 60,000 population equivalents. And as you know, our district is growing really fast, and we're probably sitting around 42,000 at the moment, population equivalents. And so it doesn't take too long to think, what's going to happen when we hit 60? And so the idea of this is to say, well, we are thinking about that. And the dream is to say, well, let's double the capacity. What would Pines 120,000 capacity look like? We're looking at 2 options. Option 1 is to carry on as we are, same technology to duplicate the current plant thereabouts. And the second option is to add primary treatment and an anaerobic digestion process. So it's a new technology, and it's something that comes available to us once we hit around 70 to 80,000 population equivalents. It's not something that we would do financially now, but when we're looking at a big scale Pines plant, that's something we would look at doing. The benefit of an anaerobic process is that we can generate methane gas and then generate electricity or heat or some other fuel to run the plant. So there's some real benefits there. We've got some diagrams. If you turn to page, go back on page 89, there's an aerial photograph of what Pines looks like currently. And then if you turn the page to 90 and 91, you can see what Pines could ultimately look like. And it's quite a nice representation, so we can visualize what those components would look like. So that's Pines 120. We're now carrying on the wastewater thing. We'll talk about Alzheimer wastewater treatment plant. So ahead of this next long-term plan, the 2021 LTP, we're looking at going through the process of developing a concept design to upgrade the Alzheimer wastewater treatment plant. And this upgrade is required to allow for future growth to the plant to process the additional flows from growth. So looking at 2 design scenarios. The first one is to provide treatment to a Pines type level treatment. And the second option is to carry on for the current kind of discharge, but just allow for the extra growth. And so we'll bring that back to council at some stage with costings around that. The reason for the 2 options is because not only just providing for growth, but we also have to make sure we meet future consent requirements. And so that provides us 2 options to look at that. As an alternative to upgrading the Alzheimer wastewater treatment plant, we are also looking at the option of piping wastewater from Alzheimer through to Pines. So it's just another option on the table to discuss at a later date. And so I've got a little sketch here as well showing what that could look like. That's on page 92. That shows an indicative pipe route from the Alzheimer wastewater treatment plant up through to the Pines treatment plant in Rolleston. On that map, you also see we can pick up a number of camping grounds and other townships along the way, which would be an additional benefit for that scheme. So we'll come back to council at a later stage with more costings and pros and cons for those options. At the bottom of that page, we've got Darfield and Kiwi wastewater. So there's no treatment plant, no reticulated wastewater in both of those townships. And as you know, we've set up a working party of technical experts to come up with some options about how we could service those communities with wastewater in the future. So of those options, there's sort of two main ones. One is providing treatment at Darfield itself, building a wastewater treatment plant, and the alternative is to pipe it again to Pines. So this all kind of fits into that whole Pines 120 idea, thinking big, thinking centralised. And so we have got a very rough order sort of map on page 93, which would show a potential route from Darfield down through to Pines. And there's some aerial photographs, not aerial photographs, there's some street escape photographs there, but what you can tell by those photographs is that it's rural roads, wide berms, there's a number of paper roads, so it's actually quite easy construction. The nice thing about this pipeline is that it's all gravity's on our side, it's all downhill, so yeah. So two options again, one is to look at treatment at Darfield, and the other one, the counterfactual, I suppose, is to look at what would it be if we piped it down to Pines. So that is pretty much it for wastewater. So yeah, Pines 120, Ellesmere and Darfield.
Thank you. So we'll just deal with questions on wastewater before we move on to the next item. I get a couple from me. Firstly, is 120 big enough? And if we're projecting that our population is going to end up at 100 in the mid 2040s, it's only 25 years away. We will be using that capacity, and so not necessarily designing what's going to happen, because technology and changes may be there, but ensuring that we've got the land and the availability of disposal and the purchase of that stuff, or the option to purchase up front at the beginning of this, I think is an important factor. And yeah, the rate that we've grown is just continues to be faster than what we're not conservative predictors. We think we're trying to be pretty accurate, and the growth just seems to be above where we're at. So just don't want to see us limit ourselves at 120, which might seem a big jump from 60, but I'm just not sure it's big enough. The second one for me is around, I really like, if we're moving toilets out of their campgrounds, we've got some toilets that are currently in riverbeds. It's not the right location to be treating effluent. And so I think one of the big wins, which isn't necessarily the driver of this project, but it's a nice aside, that the Ellesmere pipeline would pick up that stuff and move it out of our waterways, which we're trying to improve all the time. And lastly is just the routing of the pipe work. There's been a lot of pipes put in the ground across Selwyn in the last 5 years, and a lot of that has caused major disturbance to landowners. And so just your final comments, I suppose, were encouraging, but we'll be looking to have the route of this pipeline along roads where it can be, with minimal disturbance on private land. I was just thinking someone's going to look at these maps, they're here in front of us, and think, well, how does this affect me? And we're generating a discussion we don't necessarily have the answers for now, but if you could just give us your general direction on that, would be helpful.
Listen, I agree with all those things. I'm not sure we'll go bigger than Pines 120, but we can look at how we would scale that up from that point onwards. So I thought we were pretty visionary thinking about 120, but it's great to be challenged, and we'll take that on board. Yeah, and with Ellesmere, we'll make sure the pirate is down in an appropriate place. It does look like it's all down road reserve and should be as minimal disruption to traffic and people as we can, but that's definitely something we'll take into board going forward, if that is the chosen method going forward.
Murray was. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Murray, it's no surprise because I rang you and talked about asked this question the other day, but I'll reiterate it here, I guess. There's a couple of things there with the Ellesmere line. One, of course, is vulnerable, and it doesn't matter which route we take. We've got to cross Selwyn, so there's a vulnerability there, which obviously is an engineering solution. But the second is really, whilst there's bonus in taking it through the route that's suggested there and picking up those campgrounds, if we look at greater benefit, the alternate way to go is up towards the main South Road and pick up Dunsandel, which would, once we solve the Darfield Kiwi problem, is our last major unreticulated sewage township. So I guess it may well be discounted, and there's very good reasons for the proposal you've got, but I'm just wondering what degree of work would be could be undertaken to explore that as an alternate approach as well. I know we've discussed it in the past, whether it's just something you've discounted because it just isn't feasible, or whether there's a work stream that we could add, give you some more work, Murray, to give us an alternate that would give that township a solution to reticulated sewage as well.
Oh, that's a really good point. So we have had an initial look at running up through Dunsandel, and it didn't seem to work out financially as well as we hoped it would, but perhaps we can do a bit more work on that and bring that back as an alternative option.
It's potentially just a funding issue, but a funding issue rather than a logistical issue. If it's a logistical issue, then it's easier to discount. If it's a funding issue, then we've got to put our hats on and work out how we fund it.
Alexander?
Thank you. That was on my list of questions, was did either of these proposed pipeline routes enable an economic connection for Darfield? The Leaston to Pines, Darfield to the north, uphill. So again, it potentially, while it's would be a longer pipeline, it's all gravity fed to some convenient point on that pipeline where it could join, or it could come along Main South Road to join the Darfield or Burnham connections. So that I think we should, in these designs for all of these networks, be looking at, is there an opportunity to optimise that at some point when Darfield is connected, not Darfield, Dunsandel is connected, we have made the best provision for it. So that when we're designing these pipelines, let's ensure we think about that. My first comments were with regards to the Pines 120 and the two different systems is really around the impact of the financial modelling of the impact on rates and development contributions, because while one model may be more expensive to build, but if it's longer term cheaper to operate, then you'll save money on the operations. It'll pay for the loan cost of the extra capital to build it. And at the end of the day, that's often a more important impact for our ratepayers is what's the long-term rating impact. Well, they could accept a higher upfront cost for a lower operating cost if it means the rate overall over time is lower. And if we get a benefit from a lower overall rate and a better system for the environment, then that's a win-win. We like win-wins. I agree with the Mayor that we need to make sure that the design here, like the Pines has been today, is still able to be extended in the future as we keep growing, and that we need the disposal land to finally dispose of the treated effluent. The land we've got today, I don't think is big enough for 120k PEs, and we need to make sure that we have allowed for that. With your comment about continuing the treatment at the Ellesmere plant and pumping treated effluent to the Pines, in our modelling for Darfield, Kiwi, have we considered that as part of the model? Would it enhance the system if the effluent from those two townships was to be partly treated before pumping to the Pines, so that we end up with less, it's not really noxious, but less odorous effluent being pumped long distances? Is that in the modelling being considered? And we look forward to reading the answer of yes, no, and why.
Perfect. Yeah, so it's a question I didn't answer for Sam too. So with the current land, we have at least capacity up to maybe 80,000 population equivalents there. Potentially could push it further, but you start to lose a bit of redundancy if you take a pivot out. So part of Pines 20, it's likely will require additional land to be purchased as part of that project if that was go ahead. Yes, Ellesmere works really well with treated effluent for a number of reasons. One is the odour matter, but it's also we can reduce the pipe sizes because we can buffer the flows within the oxidation pond itself. In terms of Darfield, we are starting to look at that as an option, putting bulk storage there, but there's storage don't cost. The benefit of Darfield is majority will be a gravity fed line, so you can actually get airflow into the line as it flows down, whereas it's a pressure line that doesn't have that. So we know we'll definitely talk about that a bit more. Operation costs is something that we'll look forward, bring forward to the LTP discussion and work out that will go. This presentation is sort of there to whet your appetite for more, if I could say that. Yeah.
Some of my issues have been covered. I'm pleased you're looking at more land. There was a capacity limit on that land through the consenting process. And it's important that you recognise for the sustainability of the landowners downstream from this facility that they are already having fluctuating high nitrates in their drinking water. It's a cumulative impact. Every little bit that goes in actually adds to more. So while you may say that we're consenting or meeting our consent issue, cumulatively with the increase, it is impacting downstream. So it's a cumulative issue of a non-point source. And the more that you can actually dilute, or in engineering terms, reduce that capacity from the pine site, would help long-term everybody concerned. I could have another argument with regards to the fact of going forward from an environmental point of view. We have a lot of septic tanks that would be alongside this particular pipeline or pipeline streams. Is there any way that we can look at connection of septic tanks as a policy to reduce that particular issue? Just highlighting, you know, and what I'd like to see basically is that we have some sort of strategy brought to us. I mean, this is all sort of rushed through, I guess, to try and spend our funds from the government. And we've only got a certain time to actually do this. But I think in reality, we need a strategy. I'd like to see Dunsandel connected through into the system. I'm quite aware that when the motorway goes through, there's going to be a lot of demand or increased demand for growth in Dunsandel. And I'd also like that when we consider our growth aspect, Dunsandel, Rolleston, Kiwi, Burnham, we talk about affordable housing. What people don't realise is part of affordable housing is the cost of your foundation. If you live in an area where you've got heavy soils, your foundation is going to cost a lot more money than on those lighter soils. So there's a cost factor that you need to consider long term with regards to building in affordable housing as to where some of our townships can grow and which of our townships maybe, right, need some form of realisation that there is a capacity limitation on those particular areas to grow. I'm highlighting this because we've got to get back to the issue of climate change, sustainability, and the impacts of that when we're looking at a strategy for designing all of our infrastructure. That's just not, this is a nice design, let's do this. We've got a process that is outlined that we actually have to follow and show that we've actually followed it. Unfortunately, the government hasn't given us time.
Councillor Heston, I think we're going very wide in
I know,
your
but
comments away from the report.
I'm just trying to highlight that it's just not drawing lines on the map and saying, let's put this in. There's wider issues that we actually need to consider with regards to a strategy, not...
Well, I'll go through and answer those. So in terms of nitrate, there are fluctuating nitrate levels around pines, but it's not due to pines, it's due to existing land use and other activities around. Our wastewater treatment plant treats nitrate to a very high level, irrigates it to land, and sometimes we actually have a nitrate deficit, and it's almost tempting to actually apply fertiliser to get a nitrate in grass growing. So that issue is not from pines. In terms of septic tanks, we focus on our big townships like, say, Darfield and Kiwi, which are our septic tanks. What we don't want is lots of individual lines, individual properties joining onto our main trunk sewer lines. So it's a critical asset, and every time we have a connection to it, we have a sort of weak point. So I hear what you're saying, but we definitely want to, so townships or small communities in bulk, that's okay, but we won't want individual property owners joining onto that line. In terms of a strategy, I suppose this is the start of that process. So we're looking at forming a strategy to come to the long-term plan process. This report has no connection to the government funding and grants. It's just a standalone report saying it's what we're looking forward to in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thanks, Murray. Good to see option 2 with the anaerobic digestion. It is something that I've been asking about for a little while, and it is some way that we can reduce our solids content that we are having to dispose of elsewhere off site. So might come under where Councillor Hassan's talking about looking at climate change and stuff going forward, although then there's generating methane. So don't know where that sits when you're actually looking at carbon calculations on that. But one concern I have is industrial discharges. Obviously, those can be far above what we have BOD and COD for population wastewater. So when we're talking about population equivalents, what does that actually mean? And how much thought have we given to, obviously, across the other side of the highway is a big area that's still to be developed. We've obviously got a bylaw that we're going to be looking at what they're putting out, but it's still something that we need to be mindful of going forward.
Yeah, so that's something we take into consideration, but it's a really hard thing to plan for because so population equivalents, we say, well, a typical person would sort of, this would be the product from them and what it looks like. And then from an industrial point of view, you may have one discharge, but it may be equivalent to 100 households.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to foresee what that's going to be. Currently, we have a couple of industrial discharges, which have quite high population equivalents. That said, most of the businesses in iZone are sort of factories, warehouses, so actually warehouse storage type places, and they have very low loading on there. So all we need is a couple of large industries to join iZone, and that would definitely take up a lot of our capacity at Pines. Yeah. So we're keeping a close eye on that for sure.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear, and I would have thought that, but it does lend more weight to Mayor Broughton's suggestion that maybe we should be looking higher than at 70 to 80 population equivalents. I mean, no offence, but the population equivalence figure that you're saying is an arbitrary thing. And I mean, there's so many different factors there. We don't know where it's going to end up. And it's really trying to plan for the future, but it's also trying to balance on how much investment we make when we don't actually know where it's going to end up. So I can appreciate the difficulty that you have.
And I'll say that's one of the hardest things, because if you upfront too much infrastructure, then that growth or that industry doesn't happen, well, then you're lumped with that cost.
Yeah.
And it's going to have to be ratepayer funded.
And there's still a cost to maybe having that sitting there if you're not using it as well. Now, just looking at Alzheimer wastewater treatment plant, and
sorry, Councillor Reid, we're entering into quite a lot of discussion here around things. So if councillors if we can just try and we can say what we need to say and ask all our questions, and then have staff respond to that part, and then we'll just make sure we get around the table, because we've just got 2 or 3 other questions. I'm not picking on you, Nicole. We're all doing it, but we're just in danger of taking up all afternoon on this. So if you can finish what you'd like to say, and then Murray and Elaine will have you respond, and then we'll move on to the next item. Thanks.
no, I'll talk to them offline then about what they're looking at talking about with the wastewater treatment, Alzheimer wastewater treatment plant.
Kia ora, Nicole. Thank you, Sam. Just quickly, big sky thinking, great team. I like the report, excellent. Just quickly understanding option 2, the Pines 120. Obviously, there's a couple more solar drying halls in there. Understanding that's quite that's a bit of a cost involved in mitigating some of that. How do we see that moving forward if we're increasing sludge? Obviously, I see we had a bit of a tour there the other week, and actually, in my eyes, it could be quite an asset. So more research into that, possibly, so to mitigate some of that cost, bring that down. So I don't know whether it's a question or a statement, but yeah, that's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's good. And to answer Sam, the wastewater is so exciting. So I can understand why councillors want to talk about it. But I suppose what we're looking forward is we actually want to instead of a sort of a waste treating system, it's actually a resource producing system. So we're actually providing, maybe it's fertilizer that people can take away, or soil, or things like that. So going forward, instead of just being something that produces waste and disposes of it, something that actually produces something we can then on sell. It's more sustainable.
Thank you. And I just have one comment. It's a great opportunity to bring us all together as a district, albeit through our search.
Yeah, thanks, Murray. Look, I'm fully in agreement with upgrading the Pines for future growth, and I think that's a great thing. So that's not a question. But the question that I have is, what's our fallback position if we have quite extended and elongated pipelines, maybe even feeding from Ellesmere or Leiston or from Dunsandel through to the Pines and we have an earthquake or an alpine fault, what's our fallback position if we actually have all our eggs in one basket and we do not have a pipeline? Maybe it's busted in quite a few places, which is likely to happen. We know that the alpine fault will at some stage go, but possibly even in my lifetime. I'd really be interested what your fallback position is.
Yeah, no, and that's a really important thing for us to take into consideration going forward. So our current system, we've got lots of backup storage in Lincoln, some in Rolleston. We can have redundancy pipelines pumping through to Christchurch City Council. So we're making sure we have that redundancy built in. So for Ellesmere, we've got the pond, which we can buffer flows. We have this disposal fields existing, which we can fall back on. Darfield's probably the one we need to spend the most attention on as well, and making sure we use resilient pipes like PE pipe, flexible pipes that can have a bit of distortion. Maybe having lengths of pipes which we can easily sort of dig up, bolt in, and maybe we need emergency storage in Dartford. So all these things we need to take into account.
So the answer is we haven't got a fallback position at this stage.
No, but we don't have a storage system either. Yeah, but we will be working through that for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. If you'd like to move on to potable water, thank you.
So I thought I was handing over to Elaine, but it's still me. This is the first on page 86, right at the top there. So a questionnaire will be going out to our ratepayers of rural supplies, hopefully towards the end of this week, early next week. And basically it's asking the question, are you happy with the number of units you have, or would you rather have less and pay less, or do you foresee yourself wanting to subdivide or have more stock on your land, and would you want more units? So that questionnaire is going out. And the idea is to help inform our long-term plan. So if we have a whole lot of people in one area wanting more water, within the long-term plan, we can upsize pipes, make sure we have enough source water and things like that. So just to let you know that will be going out, as I say, later this week or early next week.
Great. Any questions on potable water? No. Stormwater.
Okay, so the first one we've got here, really, was Glen Tunnel. And so there's been a few questions about what's happening in Glen Tunnel in regards to stormwater and what the issue is. And I think Dan Meehan covered this quite well in the Audit and Risk Committee for those who were there. But we're doing a bit of work there, and it's in regards to the hill behind Glen Tunnel. And so there's been some drainage issues, as all the water that feeds down that hill currently goes into a single drain that's privately owned. And I think that's caused some of the historic issues. So now we're kind of looking at getting involved there and pricing to clean that drain, remove obstacles and upgrade the existing culverts within that drain. And so that work is currently being priced and is going to be undertaken by SiteCon. And we're also looking at undertaking some condition assessments there. I don't know there's much else on that. And then Arthur's Pass stormwater. And so I think there was some draft annual plan submissions on this, but I haven't seen too much. But from the work that we've been undertaking, we've been doing some work in conjunction with the roading team in regards to clearing out a number of drains and culverts within the township, and looking in the long-term plan at further options around the drainage in Arthur's Pass. But yep. There's much else on that.
Thank you. Any questions on stormwater? Councillor Miller.
I suppose I'm just a wee bit concerned about the drainage where you state it's moving from private to public responsibility. I guess I just want some assurance that we're not setting a dangerous precedent where people who don't maintain their drains over time to the stage where it becomes an issue that we ride to the rescue and solve the problem for them, because I'm sure a lot of private drain owners will be looking at this with interest going, maybe if I don't do my own drainage, the council might write it and save the day. So can you just give me some assurance this is a solution just for an individual case, not a change in policy?
Sorry, I can't give that assurance. I think what we're seeing here is that there's a number of critical drains across the district which are right next to our townships. And landowners, if they don't maintain them, then the effects on that is quite widespread. And so for a relatively small cost of cleaning out a drain, we actually solve a problem for a lot of people. But by no means is it going to be saying that we're going to proliferate and maintain everybody's private drains.
just referencing the Drainage Act, which enables us to go and clean drains that are not cleaned properly and charge the person, the ratepayer responsible. I just keep that in our mind.
So I think I'm on again. So section 3.5 water races. So similar to the rural water supply, we're also going out for a questionnaire for water race users. And the idea of this survey is to find out people's appetite to fund water races for stock use on a long-term basis. And I think what we're seeing is, what you all know this, is that as time goes on, more races will be closed. As races become closed, we have less people to fund water races, and so the burden falls on those who remain. And so as we continue to close water races, those existing people have to pay more. And so what we're trying to find out is, well, actually, how much are you prepared to pay for this service? How much does it mean to you? And that way it can feed into a long-term plan to help form our strategy for water races and our rating structure for that. So it's a really important survey. And again, it will go out late this week or early next week.
Thank you. Councillor Alexander and Councillor Lemon.
I think Murray had his button pushed before I did.
Oh, thanks, mate. We jumped past land drainage too, Murray, so there's a question there, and although you've got nothing in it in red, I'll just quickly ask a question that's been asked of me, and you can answer this offline if you like, is around the triennial meetings for those land drainage committees. I've had an inquiry around that, so I'll catch up with you at some stage and have that conversation. But water races, I hope we're not sending a survey out to the Upper Ellesmere race people. I think they've given us a fairly clear, so that's not phone calls I want to get. I think we've been given that answer and we've made it fairly clear we're closing that race. So I guess the old chestnut, Murray, I raise it every time you present to us in council that we have resolved to close that race, and it'll be good to know what progress we've made on that. And also won't put you on the spot here today. I think it'd be good to have that in your report going forward on a monthly basis. So yeah, that's my statement.
Thank you. And Murray, if that answer, it needs to be for legal reasons in a publicly excluded environment, we can have that as part of the PX report back.
Just say a cheeky comment saying it's great to hear that land drainage committees are keen to have a meeting, so we'll organise that for you.
Yeah, I just had a question around the water race survey that is being sent to those who are currently using the water, rather than those who are all being rated for it, who may not be using it and don't want to pay for it. So it's just to the water race those subset of water race ratepayers who are using the water race, rather than to all water race ratepayers.
So the questionnaire is going out to everybody who pays a per hectare charge for the water race to see what they think of it.
Thank you. So that's to all ratepayers who are paying the water rating, rather than just those who may actually be physically using the water.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
Murray's question from me around land drainage, you've talked about it being reviewed ahead of the long-term plan, and that's sort of the same what we're doing for water races and what you're doing there. What's your time frame for getting that done ahead of the long-term plan for land drainage? Because sort of appears that would need to start this month or next month to get it done in time.
Yeah, it's going to be really tight. So we've done a lot of work. We've come up with a number of scenarios about how we can fund that. By the sounds of this land drainage committee meeting, would be a great place to socialise that with the current committees, and then come to council following that.
Thank you. And Three Waters grant and delivery plan.
Yep. Do you want to talk to that, Murray? Or?
Yes, this is about the third time we've actually highlighted this over the last month, and we obviously are discussing this after this meeting today. Just ahead of that, it was really timely, I think, to just highlight paragraph 3, which is that, and we had a DIA Crown Infrastructure Partners webinar last week, which also reinforced the need not to overcomplicate, be simple, and be achievable. So we will be talking about that later this afternoon. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we have that discussion later. Thanks.
And just add, that's a great opportunity, isn't it? $10.66 million is a real gift, and so something to be celebrated, I suppose.
Thank you, Murray. Thank you, Elaine, for the report. It's been moved and seconded by Macleod and Bland. There be no further questions. All those in favour say aye. Against, declare it carried. Thank you. Item number 7 is on pages 94 through 95. Documents signed and sealed, 1 through 8. Mover and seconder. Epiha and Gallagher. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. The next item is a resolution to exclude the public. Moved Councillor Reid, seconded Councillor Hassan. Any discussion? All those in favour say aye. Against? Declare it carried. And we'll just allow 5 minutes now for say goodbye to our guests and stop the recording. If you've been watching online, see you later.